Welcome to the Primitive Republic Podcast, where we talk about the most primitive aspects of man to live off the land, hunt, and sustain oneself. At the core of our humanity, there are things that drive us. A sense to turn back the clock, to get away from modern life, and search for something primitive. Every week we talk to like-minded individuals that are looking to connect and create a community of people, a republic. Now your host, Aaron Schmaus. All right, welcome back to the Primitive Republic Podcast. I've finally got my grandfather on here, my papa, Henry Barron, and it's been long overdue. He always has told us all kinds of stories. He's an entertainer and cowboy poet and author and all kinds of stuff, so I get the benefit of listening to his stories all the time, and I've been meaning to record some of our conversations, and finally I went back to South Carolina for a little while and decided to record some of our conversations. So earlier we were talking about one of his camps on the Smith River in Montana, and we were talking about Indian caves that were up there and all kinds of stuff like that. So I'll let him give a little bit of his background, or a lot of bit of his background. He got quite a background, so I'll let you take it away.
You mean outfitter background? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, all of it. I mean, he moved to Montana in, what was it, 78?
78, yeah. But no, I moved to Montana in 74. And the next year I went into the outfitting business. And I outfitted for 24 years as a big game outfitter, and we hunted everything from bears, antelope, deer, whitetail, and mule deer, and elk. And I had several different areas. One was 44 sections that belonged to the Kempton Ranch, and then I had a permit in the Elkhorn Mountains when it was 278,000 acres in the Elkhorns, and Monty Schnurr and I had that. He had a camp, and I had a camp, and there was one other outfitter had a bow camp on the north end of the Elkhorns. But other than that, we had that together, and it joined my 44 sections that I had with the Kempton Ranch. And the Kempton Ranch had worlds of deer and elk and antelope and everything you could think of on the ranch. And when I first went there, nobody had really hunted the place in 7 years. And so we took a lot of mule deer that were 30 inches and better off of that place. And there was so many deer on there, it was just unbelievable. And every client that came got a deer. They might not have got their elk, but they did get a deer. But my average elk hunt over my entire 23 career was we averaged 77% of our clients got elk.
That's outstanding, because right now I think the harvest percentage for elk is like 10%.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think 10% of elk hunters get an elk, and I want to say it's on average an elk hunter gets one out of every 9 years.
Yeah. Well, I just got through showing you the pictures of the Smith River Ranch, a country that I had. And you've seen the number of elk that I took there, and that was over a 4-year period, 4-year hunting season in there. And my ratio there was like 80%. And everybody that wanted one got a mule deer. And there's some whitetail, but there was more mule deer on the ranch than there was whitetail. We had lots of mountain lions, and it was amazing that we had so many deer on the ranch and so many mountain lions. We saw mountain lions every day, during the day, every day we'd see.
Wow.
Some of the clients would see mountain lions, and there was little ones, big ones, medium sized ones, and but the mountain lions usually they make a kill, and then they'll do maybe a 60-mile circle, and they'll do a kill in different places, and then they eat what they want, and then they hide it, cover it up, and then they make their circle, and they come back and they eat on it again. So um, I guess because of the area, there was so many deer in that whole country there on the Smith River that they never run out of a supply of food in there. And but the good part about the Smith River was its beauty, and it was high cliff country, and we had 360 acres that were fenced in that I ran my horses in, had a good corral and a good well, and so we had good water. And there was a species of elk in there that the Fish and Game didn't know about, and nobody else that I ever talked to. But I called them mulehead elk because their heads were long like a mule, a lot longer than a normal elk, and their eyes were from 1.5 to 2 inches wider between them than there was on a normal elk, and they looked kind of strange, but they were all really big elk. And we killed 5 of those over the 4 years that I was there. And I had Mr. K. Cool there, who was the head of the Fish and Game at that time, and he come and stayed there in the camp with us for 4 days, and we happened to kill one while he was in there, and he said he'd never seen anything like that before. And then I had a place over in the Castle Mountains, and we had 22 sections there. And then later I leased the Battle Creek Ranch, and ended up, after a period of quite a few years, I ended up selling my outfitting business to Larry, who owns the Battle Creek Ranch.
Yeah, that was Larry Rickmeyer, right?
Right. And we've been running cattle drives out of there with the public for the past 9 years. And before that, we ran them out of Townsend and went up Dry Creek all the way to the Battle Mountain Ranch, and that's where we ended up staying in their beautiful country up there. And this, I did 63 of those cattle drives, and I'm going to do one this summer. It'll be the 64th cattle drive that I did.
It was pretty funny. So, speaking of Larry and, that whole Townsend area and stuff like that, I was watching a YouTube video, and one of the guys from the Gritty Bowman, he's pretty popular right now and stuff, and I was watching the video, and he was on an elk hunt and stuff like that, and after we've been pushing cows all over that area, I was like, that looks like the Flynn Ranch, and then it pans out, over the valley, and I was like, that is the Flynn Ranch. And I had sent him a message. He never responded. I said, how do you like the Flynn Ranch? And he never did respond. But
I'll be dang. Yeah, it's kind of neat. Aaron and I watched these kids grow up, and on our little ranch there in Townsend, there was 360-acre grain field out there, and the farmer that farmed for me there, he spilled a lot of grain, and so we had a lot of ducks and geese and stuff, and the hedgerow all the way around it. And I'd take Aaron and his brother Brandon out there with me to shoot ducks and geese, and I'd shoot them, and they'd run out there and try to catch them before they hit the ground in there. And it's kind of neat. We're sitting here talking now in my trophy room, and I've been blessed enough to be able to hunt in many places around the world. And we've got one side of it is all American animals, and the other side and both ends are African animals. So I was talking to a guy the other day talking about the different types of animals that were in here. And he said, well, what all have you killed? And I said, I've killed everything from elephants to piss ants. And he said, how did you kill piss ants? I said, I mashed them with my thumb. But I'm sitting here, Aaron and I are sitting here on 2 elephant foot stools. And they got over to my left over there's the elephant tusk, and there's some wooden giraffes and all kinds of African animals. There's 16 animals in here that are in the World Record Book. And so I've really been blessed to be able to hunt in many places. I hunted in Mexico, in Canada, and Alaska, and all in 4 different countries in Africa, and killed all kinds of stuff.
Well, a lot of people look down on, people that hunt in Africa. They don't see any reason that we should hunt in Africa, and it just, it blows their mind that why would you want to go kill a lion? Why would you want to go kill an elephant? But what was your experience, in Africa? Like when you shot your elephant or when you shot your lion or anything like that, what was your experience? You couldn't bring all the meat back, but
no, the deal is in Africa, and it was true all over Africa, that the white hunter, they called him the white hunter, that leased the land from the government. They didn't own anything; they just leased from the government, and whatever was harvested off of that piece of land in there, the outfitter could only keep 25%, and the other 75% went to feed the people that lived in that area in there. So it was really a neat deal. The only meat that those natives got was what was killed by outfitters. Yeah, and so it was, to me, it was a really neat thing. And one of the reasons that I killed the animals is to have a trophy room like I got now. And we've had people from all over the world, and they bring kids here by the busloads from the schools, and I let them pet the animals and stuff, where most people won't even let them touch them. And I let them sit on, I have a lion right here behind me, and it's mounted laying down, and I let the kids get on it and take their picture.
Well, that was an interesting story too, right? That lion would have died anyway.
Yeah, the lion was, he had been fighting with another lion, and he was with another lion when I shot it, except he ran out in the dry riverbed, and the other lion stayed in the trees there, and we didn't see him until I killed the other one. And then we went back and got the Land Rover and drove down the dry riverbed to where the lion was. And so we were all celebrating because it was the biggest lion that they'd killed in that Charissa area in Zimbabwe. And so we were all celebrating, and all of a sudden that other lion jumped down off of the cliff about 35 yards away. You ought to seen everybody scrambling trying to get a gun. Luckily, he ran out in the middle of the river and stopped and looked at us, and then he ran and he jumped up on a ridge that was probably 12 feet high, just went like that and jumped up on him and disappeared.
Well, looking at the skull of the lion that you shot, he's got a hole right in the center of his nasal cavity.
He'd been fighting with that lion, and that other lion bit him all the way through the skull. And when we skinned him out, it was infected right next to the brain. So he would have probably died in a couple of weeks anyway.
Yeah.
In there. So we got a lot of trophy mule deer in here, and trophy elk, even turkeys.
Yeah.
Caribou, and all kinds of African animals.
Yeah.
But there's 16 of these are in the World Record Book. And it's kind of a museum on sale because I've got pictures. I've got coppers that were done by Dennis Thompson in Africa, who's dead now. And
signed pictures by Denver Pyle.
Yeah. Denver Pyle, he was my fishing buddy. And we fished together in Africa. And then he come and stayed with us. And I took him and his wife on a pack trip into the Elkhorns. And we went fishing together, I don't know, maybe 5 different times, 5 or 6.
Yeah, and if you don't know who Denver Pyle is, if you've ever heard of Grizzly Adams or Uncle Cooter from Dukes of
Dukes of
Hazzard,
Hazzard, yeah.
that's Denver Pyle.
Yeah. And then on further around to the right, I got Charlie Russell painting there from 1911. And I ran a dude ranch in Montana, and there was a cabin there that Charlie Russell had stayed in and lived in to paint out of. And his bed was still there and an old dresser stuff, and it was log. And it belonged to Arlie Craig, the ranch did. And so I tried to get him to let me redo it, but keep it, back like it was. But he said no. Yeah, he didn't think he wanted to fool with it. Just leave it like it was, And so I guess if it hadn't fell down, it's probably still that way.
We got Nick Price over there.
Yeah, then
you and Nick have been friends for a long time.
Yeah, I got all kinds of museum stuff in here. I got rattlesnake. I had a rattlesnake that weighed 64 pounds that I killed in Ocala National Forest. It's hanging on the wall. And then I got a Montana rattler, which that one from Florida could eat him for breakfast. And then I have a picture over there of Al Geiberger and I. Al Geiberger was the first golfer to ever shoot 59.
Oh, wow.
And so I have on my golf bag, I have a tag. It said Mr. 59, and he signed it for me. And I have a picture of him and I played in a PGA tournament in Lake Mary. And we came in second in there. And the picture there is, it was raining, and we got an umbrella and stuff in there. Super nice guy. He told me that he had a 3-year-old boy. And that they had a maid, and they had a swimming pool. And the maid went out the door to the swimming pool to do something and came back in, and she didn't close the door all the way, left it gapped open, and she was doing something else, and the baby opened the door and went out and fell in the swimming pool and drowned it. And he was only 3 years old. Later on, they had another boy, and he grew up and played on the PGA Tour for a while. And then he went into some kind of commercial business, and he quit playing golf. I don't know what reason, but he did. And also on the walls in here, I've got 2 carvings that were done by Pete Peterson. He was a world-famous rodeo clown. He was also a former world champion bull rider and saddle bronc rider. And he had a clown act that he had a mule and a skunk. And he did his clown act at all the rodeos, and he's in the Rodeo Clown Hall of Fame in Seattle. And then I have 2 of his carvings. And after he quit the clowning business, he started doing those carvings like that right there, Aaron. And he did this for commercial people. Made these big signs and all for them.
Those
and there's a picture of my airplane there, and there's knives that I've got clients that gave me from all over the world. Same way with belt buckles and all kinds of stuff from Africa, ostrich eggs, and there's a sheep painting up here. I befriended a young fella came to Townsend, and the mayor called me and told me they had a young fella there that needed some money to get back home in Wyoming. And so wanted to know if there's anything I had for him to do. So I said, yeah, send him on out. So he came out, and he stayed and worked for me for about 10 days guiding. And so then all of a sudden he said, well, I've got enough money. You gave me enough money, I can go home. And so he left and went back home. So about a month later, Carol and I came back from Helena, and there was a package on the front porch. and it was that picture that you're looking at right there of those sheep,
Hmm.
and his mother painted that.
Wow.
So that was kind of neat. And below that, there's a couple of paintings there that I found in an old trunk in a low log building uh, in the Smith River country over there. And I think that uh, one of them looks like an outfitter friend that was on my board of directors when I was head of the outfitters, but I'm not sure. But those are pack horses, and then there's some mules and stuff. But neither one of those pictures are signed, and so when I had them come in and do a estimate on what my trophy room was worth, I asked him about those pictures, and he said, "Well, normally pictures like that, they don't sign them, but they put a note in there and put it on the back of the picture, and then they cover the back of the picture with brown paper. And both of those are that way. And I've been tempted to take the paper off just to see, but he said if you do that, you earn the value of the pictures. But I'd really like to know.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you could hold it over a light and be able to see through that brown paper.
I don't know. It might do that. And then there's a picture of the stagecoach I built. I went through buggy building school over in White Sulphur Springs, and learned how to build buggies and wagons. And
Yeah, I remember that when we were younger.
and so they asked me, said, "Well, what you gonna build when you get out of school?" I said, "I'm gonna build a stagecoach." He said, "Nobody ain't never built a stagecoach. They're all made by commercial people." Well, we asked the Historical Society in Helena if they knew that if a stagecoach had been built by an individual, and they checked that out, and they said nobody's ever built one before. They were all built commercially. But the average commercial stagecoach ran 250,000 miles before they junked them.
Hmm.
So I thought that was kind of
Wow.
neat.
Well, I mean, that's crazy. You think about it; those roads aren't.
Yeah,
they're not
it was all
paved.
dirt roads,
Yeah. They get the crap beat out of them.
potholes and all that stuff. But I built that stagecoach, and we drove it in all kinds of parades and cattle drives and whatever. We did the Montana Stock Growers Centennial wagon train with it, and we
That
had
looks
Sam
like
Abel
red
with
and
us from
sage.
National Geographic.
Is that Red and Sage pulling that thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Carol and the guy from National Geographic is inside, and that's me driving it up there. I got it on the back of my last two books that I've written. So far, I've written 5 books. I'm writing another one now on an area where Aaron's going over hunting this coming fall. And it's I've been all over that area. I think I've landed my airplane at about every area in Montana at one time or another. And it didn't matter where they had runways or not. He'd land on the dirt roads where there wasn't any. And the dentist there in Helena accused me of using my airplane for a Jeep. But I was the head of the outfitters I was a vice president for 2 years, a president for 2 years, and then I was executive director and public relations officer for 11 years. And I published the newspaper for him called the Mule Milk News. And that went all over everywhere. And then I became president of North American Outfitters, and I represented all the outfitter organizations from New Mexico to Canada. And while I had that job, part of my job was to go with the Forest Service and inspect all the public campgrounds and the outfitter camps on the Rocky Mountain front, and we compared them for human impact and wrote a plan called the Limits of Acceptable Change for the next 20 years in there. And I also had to lobby in Washington, D.C. for the money to repair all the trails and all the wilderness areas on the Rocky Mountains. So that was a lot of fun. And then my wife and I, we boated the Yukon River with another couple for 1,100 miles, and that was a neat experience.
Yeah.
Uh, so we spent 44 days in Africa, and South Africa, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and um, the old Northeast Africa, and it was a great, great experience. We went over there to make a movie for Safari Club International. That's what we were doing, and so I only had to pay for the uh, permits for the animals I shot. And because we were promoting Americans to come to Africa to hunt with all these different outfitters, and so we went from one outfitter camp to the other, and that was unbelievably experience doing that. And I was so blessed. I got to kill an elephant and a male lion, and I don't know, all kinds of animals. The eland, which is the largest antelope species in the world, and I got kudu and impala, yeah, springbok, and reedbuck, sable, the most sought after animal in Africa, and old ugly up there.
The hartebeest.
Yeah, Cape hartebeest. I call him old ugly. And I got a goat mounted whole up there on a cliff in the trophy room here. And then we've got all kinds of mule deer. We got the turkey. We got elk in there, really big elk and small ones. And then I've got 5 mule deer over there that are all in the record book. And I got a whitetail over the door that's in the record book. And paintings, those 2 paintings at the end over the waterfall and the pool there was done by one of my guides. They came to work for me, and he did those 2 pencil sketches for me, and they're really, really neat in there. Cape Buffalo, and I was hunting a leopard, and we had seen this leopard track 2 or 3 different times while we were hunting in Zimbabwe, and he was really a big one, and so I got a permit, and so we started hunting him, and I shot an impala, and we chained it to a tree, and or wired it with barbed wire to a tree, and if we came in the mornings, he fed in the afternoons. If we came in the afternoon, he fed in the mornings. If we came morning and afternoon, he fed at night. It was like he was up in the tree watching us,
He might have been.
And there, and so my tracker, McConey, he said, "Well, we'll get him. We're gonna hunt him tomorrow. We're gonna go in there before daylight, and we're gonna stay there till we get him." And so they built a tree stand up there, and they got it all done. And he said, "No, it make too much noise getting up and down there. That ain't gonna work. We got to dig a hole in the ground." And so what they did was they dug a place just like a grave. It was like 6 feet long and about 4.5 feet deep. And they cut these limbs and stuff, and they had 2 stools in there. And my guide and I, Patty Kurtz, he was the toughest guy I've ever seen. And so we sat down in there, and they covered us up with the bushes, on top. And so we set him, and for 3 days there, we didn't get him. We set him morning, evening, That finally said, "Okay, we're going to stay there till we get him this time." So they give us sandwiches and coffee bottles and everything, and brought them all in there. We had everything in our grave, I called it. And so we got in there, and McConey covered us all up, and then they went and got in the tree. So about 11 o'clock, and they hadn't seen the leopard, but all of a sudden the ground started kind of trembling a little bit. And you could feel the vibration. And I said, "Patty, what's that?" He said, "I think it's elephants." I said, great, here we are in the hole in the ground. And I heard the elephants coming. And they kept getting closer and closer and closer. And finally, one of them came around behind us and one of them right side of me. It was two white rhinos that they had turned loose in there, you know. And the damn rhino stuck his head right in the bushes where I was at there. I could scratch him on the end of the nose. That's how close he was. And you could hear my heart beating 100 yards, I know, you know. And he wouldn't leave. He snorted and blowed snot all over me. And I had my rifle in a saddle pointing at the bait, you know, the leopard bait. So there wasn't no way I could move around there. And if you'd shot at me to put you in jail, you'd have never got out because they were planted, you know, and they were endangered anyway. So finally I told Patty, I said, Patty, I can't stand it. You could talk. They didn't care. You know, there was one standing behind us, and then that one there that had his nose in the thing there. And he said, you can't shoot him, Henry. You can't shoot him. I said, well, we got to do something. So all of a sudden he started grinning. And he jumped right straight up through those bushes and screamed as loud as he could. And rhinos whirled around, and the one behind us took off, and the one that was right side of me, when he turned, he foot caved in there, you know, caved the dirt in right on my shoulder in there. And they turned around and they went out through the jungle. They were knocking down trees 3 inches thick, you know, blam, 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 getting out there. He scared them to death. And we got back to camp about 2 hours later, and
she had enough after that.
Carol didn't go with us. My wife didn't go with us on that trip, and so as soon as she come running out to see if we killed anything, and she looked at me and she says, "What in the world happened?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You're white as a ghost." That was an unbelievable experience. And one of the other experiences was with the elephant. We were at 6,500 feet in Zimbabwe and hunting an elephant, bull. I had a bull tag. And we, one of the Forest Service guys came by and told us that he had spotted these elephants, a group of them, and told McConey and Bruce where they were. And so he said, okay, we'll go up there the next day. So the next morning we left before daylight. And we went up there to almost to the top of where that mountain was, and we picked up the tracks. And there was 5 of them, and all bulls together. And so we started tracking them. And the trackers in Africa are unbelievable. It's handed down from generation to generation to generation. And McConey, he said, at one point, he said, well, they're only about 15 minutes ahead of us. And he could look at the limbs where they would break off a limb, and he'd tell you how far ahead of them they were.
Wow.
They were unbelievable. And that same tracker and the Forest Service tracker, they tracked the Cape Buffalo through 2 herds of elephants. One of them had about 100 in it, and the other one about 200 in it. And they tracked them right through that and stayed right on those 2 elephants' trail. And I finally ended up killing
the 2 buffaloes trail.
Killing the buffalo, yeah.
Wow.
In there. But the elephants, we got about, I guess, 2.5 hours or 3.5 hours, somewhere along there. And all of a sudden, the white hunter, Bruce, he said, let's stop and have tea. So we stopped, and they got out blankets, and they put it out, and they had sandwiches, and they made a pot of tea, and so we had tea and sandwiches and stuff, and McConey took off. And so pretty soon he came back, and he said, in Swahili, he was talking to Bruce, the white hunter, and he said that the elephants were only like 50 minutes ahead of us, and less than an hour. And so he said, okay, so he gathered up everything. We took off again. And we've got, I guess, another 40 minutes, 30, 40 minutes. And McConey said, y'all wait right here. And so he took off in the bush, and pretty soon he came back, and he said, all five of them are right together, and there's an opening up there, and they're just kind of scattered around. And this opening's about 40, 50 yards wide. And so we eased on up there. And they had ashes from teak wood, the fires, and they put them in a nylon sock. And every step you'd take, they'd shake it. And if there was any wind at all, that ash would come out of that sock, and it would blow. And so because elephants have very poor eyesight. Their eyes point down. They never see up. They're always looking down there. But their heads are at a slant. So they don't want you to shoot them in the forehead, because if you don't hit them at perfect, their bullet will slide over between their ears, and go right on up to the top or up above the head. And so they want you to shoot them in the temple. If you shoot them in the heart, their heart's so big that they'll kill you before, your heart quits beating. So you have to get within 20 steps of them before they let you shoot them.
Wow.
That was his thing there. And so we got to the edge of the opening, and there was a young bull straight in front of us, and there was two big bulls over to the right, but they were medium-sized bulls. And then there was one big bull over to my left and another one out in front of him, which was a medium-sized bull. So the one I wanted to shoot was on the left-hand side. And so Bruce said, okay, I'm going to lead the way, and then you'll be behind me, and then Patty will be behind you. Well, the blacks, they were done gone. They scared to death elephants. They were up in trees, and you don't let them carry your shells either. And so all of a sudden that young bull screamed and ran right at us. He must have ran maybe 10 yards, and he stopped. He reared up, screamed again, And the other elephants, then they started screaming. And that one that I wanted to shoot was behind this tree. And so Bruce said, you could talk. It didn't matter if you talked or whispered. Bruce said, hold on, said he'll come out pretty soon, And so by that time, that young elephant charged us again. He'd come about 10 yards and stopped. And then he charged us again. And when he stopped that time, if he reached out, he could, with his trunk, he could almost touch me. That's how close the elephant was in there. And so he put his trunk down and picked up a bunch of sand and blew it up over my head like that and screamed bloody murder. And so Patty says, Bruce said, if he takes one more step, I'll kill him. But they didn't want to kill the young bull because it takes away from their quota.
Oh, okay.
In there. So about that time, the one I wanted to shoot stepped out. And Bruce said, okay, move your gun around and shoot him. And that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done, is to take my gun off of one that could take one step and kill me, and move it around and shoot this one that was over there to my left. That was hard to do. And but Bruce said, don't worry. If he starts to take one step, I'll kill him. Now, he had a 375, and I had a 458, and Patty had a 375. And so he took one more step. The elephant I wanted to shoot did. And so I moved my gun around, and I shot him in the temple, but I hit him a little bit too far forward, and it's right on that eye bone right there, like that, and it just hit and glanced up. 458 now, 20 steps.
Wow.
It didn't penetrate. And so he staggered back behind that tree again. And so when he did that, when I shot, that little elephant just reared up and turned and took off. And those elephants the bigger elephants, they all took off too. But the one that I had hit he was still behind the tree. So Patty says, "Okay, Henry, get ready. I'm going to shoot him in the ass with this 375. He'll come out where you can shoot him." And so he did. He shot him in the hip with that 375, and he stepped out. And when he did, I shot him, hit him right in the temple, and he went down, and he fell on the only rock in 300 yards, and you could see where it broke the end of the truss off.
Wow.
And I cried.
Yeah, that'd be tough.
It was tough. It was tough. But the outfitting business was probably one of the most blessed times in my life. I met so many great people from all over. In the same way with the cattle drive, we had people. You worked for me on the cattle drive, so you know. We had people from all over the world.
Virginia Craft. We had all kinds of people.
Miss Craft. Yeah, her brother owns the New England Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
And we had several different movie stars and country music stars and all that have been with us. We had a great time doing that.
So how did you get started in the outfitting business?
Well, I had been my wife and I had been hunting out there with my attorney and his wife for about 9 years before that, and we had hunted in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Colorado. We would make a tour of all the states. Back then, you could buy combination licenses for $250 over the counter, and so we would hunt. Or we'd go to Idaho first, and then come back to Colorado, and from Colorado to Wyoming, and Wyoming into Montana, because their season opened last in there, and so I loved it so good, and I had built a golf course down in Florida where we lived, and so the people that were camped on our golf course, I had a campground also, they decided they wanted to buy the golf course, and so I sold it to them, went to Montana, and we bought a ranch, and then our little place there, and so I like the hunting in Montana so good, just like you do, and so I went to the Fish and Game and told them I wanted to see about becoming an outfitter. And so you had to take an outfitter test, and it was tough. And you also had to have a medical test. But my wife was working for Dr. Campbell there in town, and so I had all the information I needed, And so it worked. And so I passed the test first shot out, and I had this good friend at the Masonic Lodge where I belong, and he had the Kempton Ranch, was one of the owners of the Kempton Ranch, and they had 44 sections, and nobody was leasing it, so I asked them about leasing it. So they leased that 44 section to me, and then there was room for one more outfitter in the Elkhorns, and so I applied for the Forest Service lease on the Elkhorns, and I got it, and so that got me started in the outfitting business. And the places that I was lucky enough to lease were all fantastic places where your harvest rate was really high, and so I made a lot of money and had a lot of fun and met a lot of great people from all over the world, and I never regretted it.
Oh, it definitely changed our life because, I mean, we live vicariously through you. And
and all of my camps were all horseback pack-in too, and that people really love that. And to me, if you're going to go on a big game hunt, if you're not bow hunting and walking, the best way to go is horseback. Because when you kill an elk and it hits the ground, the fun is over.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done that several times.
And they run down in a canyon, and you got to get them up over the hill and then get them, 2 miles to the truck.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens. It seems like every time, well, actually, yeah, damn near every time they go downhill.
Yeah. But if you got horses and mules, it makes all the difference in the world. And I was lucky. I had a guide that guided for me, and he used to pack in and out of the Grand Canyon. He packed groceries and supplies into the ranch at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and he did that for 7 years. And so he went to work for me as a guide. And so I really learned a lot about packing from him. And then I also went to Smoke Elser's packing school, which he taught the Army and stuff how to pack. And he was a member of our board of directors and the outfitters in Montana. So it just seemed like everything seemed to fall in place. I got the Castle Mountain Ranch. That's the old Castle Mountains town there. That's where Annie Oakley had her frat house, you know. And the old buildings and all that, the people, they didn't care. They let the cows go in and out of the buildings and everything, you know, and really ruined the place there. But it was really neat. And then I got involved with the Parks Department for the fishing game, and they celebrate Bannock Days.
Yeah, I remember Bannock.
And at Bannock, which was the first territorial capital of Montana. And so I had my stagecoach I'd built, and so I would carry people from the parking lot into town and back in the stagecoach. And I also had my buggy with the fringe on top that I built, and we used that. And then I was a cowboy poet and had my own band, and we entertained there. And then we started supplying the food for Bannock Days. It was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so we had to tear down our old hospital. I was chairman of the board in Townsend, and they had a 6-burner gas stove, big, heavy thing. So I bought it from them and donated it to Bannock and put it in my horse trailer and carried it 100 miles over there. And it took about 10 of us to get it into the kitchen. But we finally got it in there, and it's still there. And but we would, from 11 o'clock in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, we'd serve 5 hamburgers every 3 minutes. And then in the evenings, sometimes I'd have barbecue chicken, or sometimes I'd have roast beef. And then we served breakfast on Friday morning. There was only the workers there, so we served breakfast for them. And then on Saturday and Sunday, we served breakfast also.
Yeah. If you've never been to Bannock, the Bannock Days, man,
yeah.
that's a lot of fun. You shoot black powder rifles.
Yeah, and it's all free.
Yeah, and there's cowboy gunfights in the middle of the road, and make candles and
then the fraternal girls, I bring them in the wagon, and then they start a fight, and one of them gets killed, and then they have a trial on there, you know, and when they convict him, they say, "What do you think we ought to do?" And on the public, you know, dollar, hang him. You know? It's a fun deal there.
Yeah.
They had a church service on Sunday, and Carol and I, we sang in the church, and Muriel and George and we had our band there, and then I did the cowboy poetry thing also. So it was just one busy time for us, but we enjoyed it. We had a good time. And you've been there.
Oh,
so
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I'm hoping to be able to take the girls, but with this whole, coronavirus thing, I don't know if they're going to have it this year.
Well, it's the middle week in July, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping we can do that. If not this year, maybe we'll be able to do it next year.
They'd love it.
Oh, they would have a blast.
Yeah, because they can horseback ride and stuff, too.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's right. We did the that pack trip or whatever.
Yeah, Bob McNeil furnished horses there. And then there was another guy from the university there, and was it Western University in Dillon?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. He had a horse, and he'd lead around with the little kids, you know, up and down the road all the time. And there was something going on every corner. You know, just people playing music or doing cowboy poetry or magic or something, you know.
Yeah, they cooked kettle corn in the middle of the street and all that. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I recommend people, if you're around that area, Grasshopper Creek, go and check it out.
You bet.
It's a lot of fun.
The guy that I leased from over on the Smith River, his name is Mr. Coleman. he told me that he left Oregon, and I think he said 1911, and he had just his saddle horse and a pack horse, and he left Oregon, and he ended up in Grasshopper Creek, and at Bannock, and he said he rode down through the middle of the town. He got into town about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he rode down to the middle street and said everybody gave him a dirty look, so he decided he better not and stay there. So he went down on Grasshopper Creek and pitched a cold camp down on the Grasshopper Creek. And then he left there and ended up in White Sulphur Springs and worked for a lady there on the edge of town that had that ranch. And then his folks left him enough money, and he bought the Benton Gulch place.
Mm-hmm.
And then he leased that other place from Galt. And that started the Smith River project, which was unbelievably beautiful. And that's where we killed all those mule-faced elk and everything. So,
yeah. Well, we can wrap it up, but you want to do one of your cowboy poetry?
All right. You want a short one?
It doesn't matter to me.
Well, let's see. What about propane?
Okay.
It was early in the fall, and the tree leaves had turned to gold. It was time to set my hunting camp before it got too cold. I had this string of sorrel mules. They were hard to tell apart. Each one had their funny ways, but all were very smart. At least that's what I always thought until this very day. What happened on the mountainside, in words, is hard to say. Now, there was Luke and John and Jack and Jill, all were hell to shoe. Sammy liked to kick a lot, so I put my faith in Sue. I had 'em tailed with packs on tight. In the lead, I rode my horse. We headed up towards the pass, just me and my Cousin Morris. Now, Cousin Morris was a city dude, only knew about subways and cars, and dressing up in fancy duds and smoking big cigars. Jill was packing all the grub. It was quite a load, I'd say. Sammy had both meat coolers and Sue 2 bales of hay. On Luke, I had my kitchen pack, and John had all the double. Jack had 2 old propane bottles, and that started all the trouble. The trail got steep and rocky, too, as we headed through the timber. And I'm telling you, what happened next was something to remember. Old Jack was known to stumble some, but he never seemed to fear. But Jill couldn't get stopped in time, so she bumped him in the rear. Jack's pack slammed into a tree, and that propane began to spew. He bucked so high when he come down, it was like a morning dew. Jill turned to flip and straddled Sammy. The air was filled with stakes. That propane noise got awful loud. It sounded like a den of snakes. Jill was really bucking hard. There was duffel between his feet. Jack's pack spilled the stakes, and it was something yet to see. Well, Cousin Morris, he was ghostly white. He couldn't believe his eyes. Luke and Jill were tied in knots, and Sue was on her side. Hell, I've been running pack trains for now on 30 years. But the wreck that I was looking at filled my eyes with tears. But if I ever get off this mountain, this trip won't be in vain. I'll buy myself a wood stove. Then I won't need propane.
All right, you got to do one more. My Chili in the Bucking Outhouse.
Okay. My Chili in the Bucking Outhouse. This was about the Smith River over there. In my hunting camp in the mountains, the Smith River was just below. I took my tent behind the cliff. By gosh, that wind could blow. Now, I had this group from Florida. I'd had a few times before. They had the tent wood stacked so high you couldn't see out the door. But I admit the weather was nasty, maybe 10 or 12 below, and the wind was blowing 40 knots, and there was a foot or more of snow. Well, a coyote came up to our tent, I think to steal some wood. But the temperature dropped 30 degrees, and it froze him where he stood. So I used him for a statue and placed him on the top of the roof of my outhouse, a dainty but smelly spot. Now, I had placed this house of comfort 50 yards upon the hill so you could look across the canyon and see what you could kill. And I put within some seat belts. In case of wind, you see, I thought it might go sliding down the hill with you or me. When that Montana wind is howling like the rear end in my truck, you really better be holding on when my outhouse starts to buck. Well, I just cooked up some chili with lots of onions and cheese, and I doused it full of pepper. It'd make a polecat sneeze. Everyone loved my chili, though my recipe had no name. But the buildup of the pressure is something I can't explain. In just a couple of hours, your belt gets awful tight, and that rumbling noise gets started, and you hold back with all your might. Well, this big old guy from Florida, he was 6'6" or more. He left that tent trotting towards that outhouse door. You could tell he was in a hurry. He unbuckled while on the run, and he just got inside the door when that awful noise begun. In my little house of comfort, he decided to light a smoke. That outhouse lifted off the ground. The smell would make you choke. The damn thing kept on rising. It was headed towards the sky, so I thought I'd better shoot it down before it got too high. So I carefully took my shotgun, and I shot a time or two. Before I hit that bullseye that was looking down at me and you, well, that outhouse, it exploded, caught fire while coming down. It must have thawed that coyote out before he hit the ground. He left that awful wreckage and burned a path right through the snow. And he crossed a couple of mountains before he began to slow. Well, this big old guy from Florida, he was really quite a mess, and his temper was certainly rising when that outhouse came to rest. He heard us all laughing, and his long handles were aflame, near that same old spot where I took such careful aim. Well, there must be lots of reason for a guy to get so mad, but cigarettes and chili in my outhouse, that can really make it bad. So when you eat my chili, be sure you buckle up, 'cause my outhouse is pretty dangerous when it decides to buck.
All right, Papa. Thank you.
You betcha. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Primitive Republic Podcast, an Aaron Schmaus media production. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Primitive Republic. You can also find us on our website at www.archeryoutdoorsman.com.